Afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much indeed for joining our first event for 2023. And today we're going to talk about innovation. My name is Alice Weightman. I'm the founder of Hanson Search and the Work Crowd. Hanson Search is a global headhunting company in marketing and communications, supporting agencies and brands. And the Work Crowd is an online platform, and we connect talented freelancers in marketing communications to project-based work globally. Today, we're going to talk about innovation and how to keep your brand agile in a rapidly changing market. And I'm delighted to be joined today by a great team of panelists across marketing disciplines and industry sectors. So let me introduce yourselves to Jessica, Victoria, Alex, and Emma. Jessica's background is a marketing and brand specialist. She has over 20 years of experience working for global brands, startups, and creative agencies in a wide range of industry sectors. Victoria is a strategic communications specialist, experiencing and shaping narratives and building brand reputations in high-growth, consumer-facing tech businesses for the likes of Motorway, Trainline, eBay, and PayPal. Alex is a product and pack testing lead at Ipsos and has over 25 years in the market research industry. And Emma is head of global communications for Bulb, recently acquired by Octopus Energy. She has over 20 years of experience running PR and marketing campaigns for the likes of WeWork, the Walt Disney Company, and SoundCloud. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today to talk about innovation and keeping your brand agile in a rapidly changing market. Business challenges aren't new, but we've certainly had our fair share of them over the past few years. And we've really seen how businesses have had to adapt in order to survive. But likewise, consumers are now facing considerable pressure with inflation and rising interest rates. So in uncertain times, is innovation this game changer? But I think, innovation is quite a big word, and really what is innovation and what should brands be doing and where should they be investing? And, for businesses, ultimately, it's all about building brand awareness and driving revenue. But how do businesses keep their product relevant and make sure they're communicating in the right way that's fit for the current market conditions and being sensitive to the consumers? So lots of big questions here. Is it really the time for business to be investing in marketing? And hopefully our panel can sort of help us navigate a few of those sort of questions. I would, though, say to the audience, please do use the functionality at the bottom. Do ask questions. We've got 45 minutes to an hour, so do put your questions forward. And as we sort of draw halfway through the webinar, I'll start feeding them to the panel. Jessica, could I come to you first?
Sure.
Innovation, means so much to so many different businesses. Perhaps you could start by just talking to us a little bit about what you're seeing in the market and ways in which businesses are looking to innovate.
Sure. So a lot of the work I do is around marketing capability for global brands. So working with global communities to kind of supercharge them really, to know what to do, how to do it in this changing age. So what we're kind of seeing is it can't be business as usual anymore. Everything has changed. Sticking to the old routine and playing it safe is, where brands are going to go to die. So it's the age of experimentation as much as innovation, but creating sort of that in a cultural way for businesses to be able to experiment and innovate. Not only everyone thinks innovation is product, it's not, it's innovation in how you obtain data, how you connect emotionally with your customers, what you stand for. It's the whole 360 innovation lens that I think that is an opportunity now for brands to sort of look at themselves and go, we have less, we need to do more. We need to change more than just some packaging or some product. What do we do? How do we do it? So those sorts of programs of how do we become how do we experiment? How do we challenge ourselves and set up sort of pilot experiments throughout our businesses to look at, okay, how can we change and how can we scale rapidly and take on that kind of attitude of a challenger brand and stop being the old tanker that's got lots of bureaucracy and red tape to do it. So it's an age of opportunity, I think, that's coming at brands now.
Great, thank you. Victoria, you've come from quite an interesting background for the past few years, travel and tech, and obviously at the height of COVID, you really had to adapt when you were at Trainline, the business, and listen to your customers. Can you talk us a little bit of your learnings there on innovation and how you overcame that?
I think you can boil it down to 3 points quite handily. But I think that it becomes, as you say, even more important to listen to and understand your customers, and to even more frequently dip in to understand how our attitude's changing, how is sentiment changing, because in a crisis, and particularly one such as COVID, travel was something that people could fear and did fear, but that kind of changed through the course of the pandemic. So we were really reliant on our insights team, focus groups, listening, pulse surveys, and also research carried out by the travel industry to really understand the evolving behaviours and attitudes of our customers. When it came to innovation, obviously the travel industry was very affected by COVID, and a lot of companies stripped back. So I think innovation had to be carefully thought through. It had to be right for the time. So, and that was both from a product innovation and the way that you communicated as well. You couldn't afford to be tone deaf. You couldn't, or irrelevant, or at worst, seen to exploit a situation that was so terrible for so many people. So we actually took an existing feature called BusyBot that helped people find kind of a seat on the train, and we developed that further so it became a social distancing feature, and help people understand where they were most likely to find a seat that in a part of the train that wasn't crowded, and that was carefully thought through and based on the insights that we were getting from our customers. So the third point, if it's about kind of being even more careful and attentive to your customer needs and innovating really authentically and answering their most important needs, we also continued innovating for after the crisis. So having faith that the pandemic would end and people would return to some kind of normality. So trying to think ahead and think about what people would need after COVID had run its course to a degree. So I think those were the 3 main learnings from an innovation point of view.
Great. As a user of Trainline and a commuter up and down the country, I did use that feature, so it was great. Emma, it'd be great to come on to you next. I mean, your most recent background's in energy, and going through a sort of energy crisis, soaring prices in energy, and ultimately putting Bulb into administration. What have you learned? How has had to adapt the comms both internally and externally?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of what Victoria's just said, actually, and I think a really big focus for us. I mean, it's always been a focus, but never more so than the last year has been on our customers. Particularly on the external comms side, when you're not doing, big fun consumer campaigns for very obvious reasons. You're not doing product launches, you're not doing all the things that are our bread and butter normally. What can you do? Well, you can provide as many updates as you possibly can to customers. You can reassure them about, particularly for a sector like ours, their energy supply. Their energy supply is going to be okay. They will have energy. The price won't change. Outside of price cap changes, it won't change as a result of anything happening with the company. So I think that was a really big priority for us as well. The other thing I would just add there, and I think equally important for us, was thinking about the team. Again, this wasn't new. We weren't sort of suddenly thinking about employees for the first time, but through our external comms, actually, as well as our internal comms, we really had to think about, there's a big team of people who are, you know, supporting all of our customers, and they're going through this hugely difficult time, a lot of uncertainty themselves off the back of a very uncertain couple of years. So what can we do to really ramp up our internal comms to make sure that they're feeling as supported as we can possibly make them feel, and also that they're hearing as much news as they can from us. They're not hearing it from the media where possible, and sort of making sure that the messages that are going out publicly are messages that are going to be okay for the team internally as well. So I wouldn't say it was a total gear shift from what we've been doing before, but it's certainly sort of helped us to focus on some things. And obviously when we couldn't do other things, it was a sort of real priority to keep looking at what we could do to help our customers and to help the team as well.
Great, thank you. Alex, it'd be great to come to you next. I mean, your background's obviously quite different from a market research perspective, and Ipsos has a number of very interesting data points across different businesses. How are businesses responding to turbulent times? Have there been any sort of previous learnings we can take from previous economic crises and challenges that they've faced? And good things. I mean, Victoria sort of discussed about some interesting new products that came as a result. You know, has any good things come from past experiences?
Yeah, definitely. I think, and Jessica, you mentioned opportunity very early on, and I think, you know, it's up to us to strike notes of optimism rather than just pessimism here. But it's really interesting. We look back at the work that we have done over the last sort of financial crash. So we went back to our concept testing work that we do. And looked at results for that in the years 2008, 2009. So what was happening then, global financial crash, and comparing against to a period of relative prosperity and when people were a little bit more comfortable. And what was really interesting there is that these periods of instability can be proved to be periods of openness to innovation on behalf of consumers. Of course, it has to be relevant to people and not exploitative. But what we saw is that when we look back at how people were reacting to new ideas in that time, which was unstable, generally those ideas had a slightly higher potential than the ones we were seeing in different periods. And also what people were showing to us is that their usual choices were becoming slightly less relevant, i.e. new things were potentially coming into people's mindset. And all of which tells us that while it might feel comfortable, or certain people who are holding the purse strings are telling to ramp back, to freeze, not to develop, actually there's very good evidence to say that the consumer openness is absolutely there. And I think that's the big message that I wanted to put across initially, is that things shouldn't stop, and there are potentially markets and opportunity out there for people to work to, and that speaks to innovation. But that you need to speak to clever innovation that Victoria very eloquently said about, that properly meets somebody's needs. And I think all the way through, just because we're in a period of instability, there are some basic needs that people have that don't particularly change. And your basic tenet of marketing, which is to innovate to something that consumers see value in, that ideally is looking a little different to the choices that they have already available to them as they perceive them. Those are still absolutely important and shouldn't change, whether you're in a recession or whether you're in a period of boom and growth.
Absolutely. Victoria, what are your thoughts?
I was just going to build on what Alex said, but kind of talk a little bit, I suppose, about marketing. A lot of marketers or companies might say, but we can't spend to the same extent as we have been. We can't invest in these big above the line or integrated campaigns in the same way as we have previously. It's just not the economic environment. We're not going to get the same results. And I think that in itself can provide an opportunity. I don't know how many kind of comms and influencer marketing specialists there are listening, but for example, I think there is an opportunity for these traditionally lower cost marketing channels, such as PR and influencer marketing, to have a bigger role. And as somebody said earlier, I think there is an opportunity to test and learn. Let's go out and try this. and see if it works, and if it doesn't, let's try this. So there is this kind of opportunity with smaller budgets, these low, I think, to invest in the lower cost channels and see how they work, and then also to test and learn.
Great. So just keeping on that topic then, I mean, some companies, I guess younger companies, it's easier for them to be a little bit more agile and innovate. And someone's actually asked something very timely, so I'll interject it now. But how do marketeers and communicators get this message across to innovate and the opportunity of innovate to board level decision makers when they're all about tightening up their belts during a downturn? So, you know, I'd love to sort of ask the panel, you know, how do they get this message across, but also how easy is it for businesses to innovate? Jessica, I don't know whether you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it comes back to, like I said before, challenging business as usual isn't going to work because the budgets aren't there. There's more pressures on marketeers. Also, behaviours have changed. So really, I think it comes back to understanding, you know, return on investment is all I hear from marketeers. How do I understand, you know, long-term brand, sort of using TV? We've always done TV, but how, you know, what do we do? How do we move that? Where do we move that? Because culturally, we have a legacy of always spending loads of money on TV, and it's like, but you can't always sort of. I think this is the age now we go, okay, well, video, let's do some setups and tests and move some of that budget to other channels and set up some tests on how you can actually do some brand building on different channels and the short-term marketing kind of campaigns as well. And I think that's back to what I said before about test and learn. Is you can set up these pilots, you can look at what are your metrics to look at return on investment, and then you can create proof points to be able to sell up to your stakeholders. Well, you know, we set up an experiment, the hypothesis is we reduced our budget by 10% on TV and moved it to another channel. We ran that test and our return on investment was higher, and here's the figures and this is the value. So I think people need data, using data, understanding the value of new channels, and particularly influencers is the big trend, because people buy from people, not brands. So there's a huge kind of surge for the knowledge on how to utilize influencers better and put them into the marketing mix, and actually how do you sell the value of influencers? That seems to be something that seems to be coming through this. So innovation is testing channels, testing what you know, and that's where I think the excitement, and there is a real appetite from global brand teams to do something different this year.
Alex, are you seeing sort of a trend across different types of businesses then, ones that are more agile, or you know, from the data that you've got?
Hard to say, actually. I think we don't hold data in that space quite so much. What I think, to take a slightly different tack, if I may, is to reinforce what I think Jessica was saying, is around evidence, you know, giving people data and quality. And I know that there is some good evidence that has been pulled together, I think, in the marketing communications industry, that says, you know, maintaining your share of voice is critically important. The brands that have maintained their communication spend to maintain their share of voice when other brands are cutting theirs down do so much better when the economic situations arise. They are much more resilient during the downtimes and able to capitalize and then grow at a stronger rate when it comes out of that. So, you know, if you're having to convince at board level, you're going to have to be showing evidence, and there's some very strong academic evidence around let's say, the investment in marketing and comms. I think the other thing that we would say is, again, with testing, your marketing and your research spend goes further and is arguably more useful and more efficient if you're testing things at an earlier stage. So that might be doing A/B testing. If you've got the ability with direct to consumers, you've got a lot of flexibility where you can test at a pretty early level. If you want to go to consumers and test with them, again, coming to them with ideas at an early stage rather than innovating over a long period and almost presenting things as a fait accompli, potentially gets you into some trouble. So the earlier you can test on simple things, it costs you a lot less, you're a lot more flexible, and your ability to then optimize and course correct on your ideas with already that proof behind it that says, we know this idea has got an above average potential. We know that we can forecast volume growth in this market to be X%. That sort of information should be good for people to actually advance their things further.
Thank you, Alex. Emma, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to build, I guess, on what Alex and Jessica were saying. And I think perhaps sort of helpful to share a couple of tangible examples, and it possibly sort of brings together some of that, you know, the creative thinking, the innovation we were talking about earlier. So last year, Octopus, and I can say this because I wasn't a member of the PR team at Octopus then, had two just really quite weird ideas, I would say, for PR campaigns, and they were their most successful campaigns of the year. Well, not campaigns, but most, you know, the things that got people talking the most about the company. One was, you know, it wasn't a flashy TV campaign, it wasn't a sort of big out of home idea. It was sending electric blankets to people who wanted them, off the back of, you know, all the energy saving advice that have been circulating, and this idea around heating the person, not the home, and all that sort of stuff to try and, you know, bring energy bills down. So it's sort of trying to be part of the solution. Very simple idea, got talked about really widely, you know, not terribly expensive. You know, when you're talking about taking things to the board, you know, that's something that was pretty easy to get signed off. And the other is a really sad story, but it was one of their customers who was bereaved and was having difficulties, and Octopus again just sort of acted like a real company, like I suppose a bunch of human beings, and going beyond just being a company, and sent their customer flowers and sort of, you know, made sure they were really looked after. And again, this story got picked up and kind of seemed to go everywhere. You know, it's not a big campaign. It doesn't have to cost loads of money. It's just thinking a bit differently, and trying to be a bit creative and doing something that makes a difference, because it's the right thing to do. But then obviously there's ultimately, you know, a nice kind of knock-on effect as well.
Absolutely, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. When businesses start innovating, and it seems this is a good time too, what everyone's been talking about on the panel, it comes with a cost. What is the panel's thoughts of where that cost sort of sits? Should that be passed on to the customer? How will the customer react? Alex, we talked a little bit about this on the phone beforehand. I'd love to sort of hear your thoughts on, you know, cost of living crisis, whilst, you know, innovation comes at a cost.
Yeah, it's well, passing cost on to consumer is always a tricky one. I think there's various things I think to think about within that. I would say that it may be possible, absolutely, to pass on an cost of innovation to consumer. You've just got to be sure that innovation is something that consumers want. You know, if consumers see a need in it and it has value, then that cost is, you know, can be met. It might be a little bit easier, or a little bit more difficult rather, in these times where people have got less disposable income and they're having to make some more difficult choices and maybe cutting back on things which are less essential. But if the innovation is a good one, if it speaks to a need, then yes, it should be able to pass it on. It's important to recognize what innovation is and what it isn't. So if you are, let's say, rationalizing, you're changing a format or something like that, you are maybe managing your costs or downsizing a product, you might well absolutely need to do that to maintain your profit, to maintain a price point, to be price resilient. All very, very good, you know, marketing or product strategies. That's not innovation. So, you know, that is to think about. You can't simply say it is more expensive, we're just going to have to pass this on. You've got a new thing, that's okay. It's got to be done in a much more sensitive way than that. I suppose I'm minded of an example that it got raised by Mark Ritson, actually. He had a lovely piece towards the end of the year about various different marketing things that happened in 2022. And you know, Pret were able to raise their prices for their subscription model. They did it in a very open and transparent fashion. They said, this is the situation. This is why we have to do this. This is what the change is going to be. but really importantly, it reminded their customers of what the value was of their subscription service to begin with. So I think it may have been moving from £20 to £25 a month. They still said if you're drinking more than two lattes a week, you are still saving money. And I think so. That's not necessarily innovation. Again, that's simply passing on cost, but it's a really good example of you can pass on your price increases to the consumers, but they have to value your service. You have to do it in a very open and a transparent way. You also have to recognize that some people will not go with you on that. And so understanding your business model, how much business can you afford to lose, how much are you going to gain by forecasting, for instance, to understand whether that volume is still going to be profitable. So can you pass the cost of innovation on to consumers? Yes, you can, but not always.
I guess it's all around customer loyalty, isn't it? And, you know, some things I'm thinking as you're talking is how to balance this sort of, clearly during these turbulent times, you're saying that customers are more open and susceptible to change. Then how do you ensure that your customers are still keeping with you whilst they're tightening their budgets? And Emma, I think you gave some nice examples there. But there's clearly those two challenges, aren't there, of driving that customer loyalty whilst, and Victoria, did you have, you know, during COVID times, I mean, customer loyalty and keeping customers on Trainline must have been a challenge. What did you see with that as we've come out of COVID, people obviously using transport a lot more?
Oh gosh, how did we keep customers? I think we had to rethink, and I'm sure there are some people who I've worked with at Trainline on the line, so I'll try and represent what we did. But we had to change the way that we communicated and what we communicated. So, for example, we knew that as well as personal safety, reassurance and education was really important. People needed to understand if they were allowed to travel, not just in the UK, but in other markets. So we made sure there was readily available information about travel by train and generally in markets across Europe so that people could understand what they could and couldn't do. We developed more of that travel alerts, highlighted travel alerts to people so they would understand if trains were late or there was a change in the timetable, so they wouldn't be left hanging around in stations where there might be a fear of infection. We reminded people that e-tickets were available on some routes, in fact most routes, and that would also stop queuing at ticket machines, etc. So it became about education and reassurance and making sure that we were there at the right time with the information people needed, and also maintaining a fairly consistent presence that wasn't around big spend, obviously behind marketing, but CRM to existing customers, for example, I think also played a really big part, and social media as well.
Great, thank you. With the word innovation, people can sometimes think of cost cutting, loss of jobs, technology taking over people's jobs, and certainly, you know, we're seeing that with trains and strikes, and you know, people are fearful of their jobs. How can businesses therefore effectively communicate without being seen as sort of whitewashing big issues? Cuts may be made in key areas like sustainability, and have an impact. So the messaging around these changes, how are businesses coping with that and having to adapt? Emma or Victoria, I mean, you've got more of a sort of comms strategy background. I don't know whether anyone would like to tackle that one. Emma.
Yeah, I mean, I can give it the first go, and then Victoria can jump in and tell me what I've missed. I think the biggest thing is obviously it's connecting it back to the purpose, the why, and I think that's, you know, it's obviously something we talk about a lot at tech companies, but I think across the board, you know, something we talked about at Disney as well. You know, why are we doing this? And it's not just, you know, the whim of management. You know, it's important for the survival of the business or the success of the business. So I think taking it sort of up a level and not being afraid to share that level of strategy and that level of direction with everybody in the company. You know, it's not that anybody's too new or too junior to to have that explained to them. So I think that's really critical. And then I guess it's, you know, it's back to my earlier point as well, about internal comms, where it really is just sharing as much as you can as early as you can. You know, if you lose the trust of your employees because they've read something in the press that you could have avoided, I'm not saying that's never going to happen, but that you could have avoided because you didn't talk to them first, I think you're really struggling to win it back then. So I think sharing as much as you can as early as you can. And the other thing I would say around the kind of job cuts piece specifically is, you know, it's a cliche for a reason, but try to do it once and do it properly rather than having to come back again, because again it sort of creates a lot of uncertainty, and it's really tough for employees. So I think that's one of, you know, many things, but it's a really critical thing that you can do to try and help people through.
I don't have much to add to that. I think it's about timeliness of communication, being as transparent as possible, and authenticity. I think the brand tone of voice and feeling there are real people behind decisions, and avoiding corporate speak or platitudes. But I'm sure there are many communications people on the call who would just go, yep. I don't think there's an easy answer to that question.
Yeah, thank you. What about on sustainability? We've had a question in on that, and it's a nice place to sort of move towards. I'll read out the question. One of the biggest innovation challenges facing us is how to achieve economic growth, but in a sustainable way without damaging the environment further. Big question, I know, but has the panel any thoughts on this or data? Jessica, have you got any thoughts? And then Alex, I'll come to you on the data piece.
I mean, sustainability topic is huge, and it falls straight back into the purpose debate as well, where brands have had to actually have a look at their sustainability initiatives, how they integrate this, not from just a product perspective, but sustainable people, planet, community. Sustainability is quite a broad word. It's not always environmental. It can be a lot bigger than that. And again, sort of how and why and what they're doing with people and the planet, and how they communicate and embed that into everything that they do. So last year we spent a lot of time setting up a lot of kind of TED Talks within global brands for communities to talk, new positions and sustainability committees being set up globally within brands to connect various parts of the business together. Because I think there's quite a challenge for marketeers on how to communicate sustainability with brands without falling into the greenwashing trap. And a lot of pressure from businesses saying, we're doing all this great stuff, you can go and talk about it, but it has to be a lot deeper than that. It has to sort of resonate with what's our long-term strategy, you know, why are we doing it? Culturally, do we care about what we're doing? Is everyone invested, from the person on the ground to the person in the boardroom? Are they all on the same page? So I think sustainability is huge. It's something that's what people want. We've got to do it, or we're going to run out of planet, aren't we? So and just looking at how do we create that balance of like I say, communication and what you're doing without it being washing, really. So I think the sort of global brands are looking at acting and doing stuff before they start talking about it, and actually making sure that they don't always have to talk about it. Sometimes the doing is enough, you know. It creates that brand purpose. People see that. So I think there's some really interesting changes in businesses happening for the better. But again, you know, that the pandemic couldn't have come at a worse time, when businesses have invested huge amounts of money in these initiatives, in production, in packaging, in marketing, you know, their carbon footprint, in B Corp. And then they're hit with all of these other things, you know, on top. So sustainability is a challenge because there is a financial investment. But I think that it will sort of separate the wheat from the chaff, really. I know where, if I'm going to buy something, I know that I'd prefer to put my money with a real company that does care, than one that looks like it's just sort of saying what it needs to say to get me to buy their product.
Yeah. Absolutely. Alex, what are you seeing from a data perspective?
Well, lots to build on, and I think I'll come from the consumer angle. I think because you might imagine that we ask consumers about a lot of things around the environment. I think it is absolutely correct to say that just about everybody agrees that things need to be done. We being everybody, need to act in a more sustainable way, and things need to happen. What is really important for everybody to recognize, especially when thinking, let's say, of consumer market rather than citizens, is that not everybody is able or willing to act on that concern. That concern is truly and widely held by everybody, but not everybody's able to willing and act on that. So Jessica, you mentioned that you are more minded to put your money to where you have choices to put your money in a more sustainable way. Our research suggests that you're probably in common with around 60% of the population. There's around 40% for whom it's like, I see it, but if it creates any kind of friction for me, or it's not easy for me, I am either unwilling or unable to act. Yes, most people will make a more sustainable choice given completely free choice, shall we say. So exactly the same everyone else, they will choose a more sustainable option, but the reality is that isn't always the case. So I think it's really important to think about sustainability is still, from a corporate side, sustainability is still absolutely your responsibility. Consumers understand that they need to do some things, but they also know that brands, products, companies, etc., need to act in a more sustainable way and change their aims. There's a couple of things I like to think about. Consumers don't willingly buy plastic. They sometimes buy plastic because that is the only way the products they want to buy come in, and that's the way they're packaged. Yes, people will try and reduce their plastic waste. Maybe they will, but they need to have those opportunities to do so. And if its companies need to be actually reducing that themselves to enable consumers to make those more positive choices. And what was I going? I've missed my final point. Maybe somebody else should come around and back up. But I had another killer thing, but it's gone from my head now.
But that was great, Victoria. I know you were looking to make a point initially.
I guess I was thinking from a scale-up point of view, and this may be very obvious, but obviously as a scale-up, you're looking to scale up, there's big opportunity, there's new markets you can go into potentially, there's new offices to be opened, all of that comes with an environmental cost. And the two basic things I guess I think about are, firstly, understand the carbon footprint of your company, go beyond scopes 1 and 2, understand your value chain, the carbon footprint of your value chain. You may be surprised, there may be a supplier that you're working with that is contributing massively to your carbon footprint, and there may be action that you can take even as you're growing. And I guess the other piece is around once you're doing the basics and understanding your carbon footprint, what can you do as you're scaling to enable your customers to take steps to reduce their carbon footprints? How can you be that enabler? So two quite basic but important, I guess, experiences or tips that I would give.
Thank you. Emma, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, just off the back of that, really, I feel like it'd be remiss not to plug Tech Zero. So we set up I guess like a sort of collective group of companies last year. So we were trying to figure out our net zero plan, exactly as Victoria says. We were trying to grapple with, what's scope 1 and 2 emissions, what are scope 3, how do we put together a net zero plan that's credible and that brings in all of the latest science and the kind of best practice. And then figured out that every other tech company probably would be doing the same, and just overwhelmed by how much there is to do and how tricky it is to find out some of this stuff. So we set up this group. It's called Tech Zero. There's a website, you can go and have a look at it, and it tells you how to do all of those things that Victoria was saying. And so it's really kind of quick and easy to do. So I think that's I guess that's what we've all been saying. It doesn't have to be a trade-off, and it doesn't have to cost loads of money. You don't need to have a huge sustainability team. You don't need to pull back on loads of other things that you're doing necessarily. It can be, and also break it down into little steps, I think, is another kind of obvious one. It feels very overwhelming when you're looking at it as, capital S sustainability, but actually you start to understand what your emissions are and you start to map out a plan. It becomes a lot less scary very quickly, and none of that needs to cost anything. And now I've saved you the work of having to do it as well. You can just go and have a look on Tech Zero or somewhere and figure it out. So yeah, it feels like a no-brainer to me, and I think it would just be absolutely horrendous if if a potential recession, the cost of living crisis, and everything else that's happening at the moment meant that net zero, it's another excuse to sort of put net zero on the back burner, as it were. I think it would just be absolutely catastrophic. So I really hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So the message is definitely sort of innovate, experiment, and make sure we're still thinking about sustainability is key. It'd be great to hear, is marketing and comms under pressure at the moment? Are you feeling that? Jessica, you have a portfolio book of clients. What are you seeing? And is that the right move for business to take, of cutting budgets? Or should we listen to the data points that Alex has talked about in terms of now is the time to innovate? Be great to actually have a reflection on the market.
Yeah, so what we're finding is, yes, budgets are hugely under pressure, and some of those budgets are under pressure because businesses are under pressure from what's going on in the world, the pandemic, geopolitical things going on, sustainability investments, innovation investments. So a knock-on effect is all budgets kind of are under pressure at the moment. But that doesn't mean that's back to what I said when we kind of opened, where people are re-examining how we market, how we advertise, to look for, okay, the world's changing, what opportunities lie there. So I think they are, but they're trying to be better at what they do. So we do a lot of things about how do we create the magic and those brilliant advertising campaigns, the golden question. How do we go from good to great with briefings? How do we create more magic with agencies? How do we become brave and bold marketeers to allow agencies to do the best work? How do we create those environments that maybe we've been a little bit sort of we haven't invested in as much as we could have? How do we do more innovative advertising with real people? So I think, yes, they are under pressure. Yes, they are all doing something about it, and exciting things are happening. And back to Alex's point, I think it was in the last 2006 recession when there was data to say a lot of brands pulled back marketing. They tended to sort of focus on the short-term performance marketing, pulled away from the big brand marketing. And those companies inevitably lost market share when they came out the other side to the companies that had continued to invest in long-term brand marketing. So data backs that up, but it's also, it's still a tricky conversation for marketers to have at board level to prove that, but I do hope that they do. But sometimes, long-term brand build marketing can just be on different channels that can be slightly more inexpensive than what we traditionally used to do. And there's lots of work and things and tests that we can do there. So it doesn't always have to be big bucks on telly, because, people don't watch telly as much. They're on digital channels. So let's look at that and make the budgets work a little bit harder. But in answer, yes, budgets are being squeezed, but it might still be possible to still get that reach and engagement.
Thank you. Alex, what's your thoughts?
I'm just building on that, and it reminded me of something that Victoria, you mentioned earlier, just about the e-tickets, the fact that during COVID times, it was a way of avoiding crowds. It speaks to this idea of it's something that's already in your portfolio, but it realizes extra benefits or co-benefits and things like that. So of course, innovation is difficult. If you're innovating products and physical products, that's costly and takes time and effort. So you need to make sure you're doing the right thing. But it may well be that there is a bunch of things already existing in your portfolio that you can start realizing new benefits with. So if we want to talk about something that might help you be a bit more resilient against the cost of living, but also with sustainability, things like refills to your products are a really good way of talking to consumers in a multiple different ways. And so you are talking a sustainability benefit, you are talking a convenience benefit, you are talking a cost benefit. And so you don't have to necessarily innovate completely new things in your portfolio. What you need to be thinking about is, what have we got at the moment, and how can that potentially be repositioned or repurposed in a way that is more agile? So that, of course, requires less investment, and it requires a bit more thinking, but it's a way that you can potentially start realizing a greater return without having to feel like you're having to forge ahead and do something completely new. So yeah, that seems to, I think, be a way that certain businesses can help themselves move on a little bit.
Good, thank you. There's a couple of questions that have come through around sort of technology, so I'll ask them before I go on to sort of looking at predictions for the rest of the year. But so it's around technology, whether the technology trends is going to be derailed for the moment due to recession or fear of recession and war fear, just like Facebook took a step back in terms of metaverse. And then sort of tying into that, whether customer behavior changed due to COVID-19 recession fear, or due to fastly changing technology. So is customer behavior changing as a result of the environment, or actually as a result of the technologies, or maybe the two are tied? Victoria, what are your thoughts?
They're quite different questions. I'm going to plump. Yeah. I'm going to plump for a point of view on the first one. So I think the first one, if I just have a quick look at it and remind myself, is whether the technology trend is going to be derailed due to recession. And this is a point of view and a hunch, but you've seen the kind of big global technology companies become leaner. You know, unfortunately, we've all seen there have been a number of job shed redundancies. But those companies are going to be leaner, and there's going to be, I think, more pressure on them to innovate. I mean, if you look at some of those big tech companies, arguably, have they innovated over the last 10 years, or have they been able to rest on their laurels? I mean, that's a sweeping statement. So I think for the big technology companies, there'll be pressure on them to innovate. And then when you look at the smaller tech players, what you've seen is a lot of tech talent come back into the market that normally the bigger companies would be snapping up and paying an awful lot of money for. So you now have more access to a bigger pool of tech and product innovators in the market who are more affordable for the smaller players. So, you know, whether you're small or big tech companies, I think there's definitely still potential for innovation. And as I think kind of a few of us have said, innovation doesn't have to cost the earth. It could be an existing innovation that you evolve. So the answer is no. I don't think the recession is going to derail innovation when it comes to tech.
And interesting, you mentioned a bit about the talent, because, you know, certainly I think businesses are innovating in how they're attracting and retaining talent and where they're looking at their talent pools.
Yeah,
you know, we've got the rise of the freelance community, so people are much more looking at sort of having people based in different locations, and so looking at their costs in that way. So certainly we've seen from a talent perspective of innovation happening in terms of how they hire and reward talent to enable them to sort of survive or thrive in today's world. Anyone want to tackle the second question on consumer behaviour? So whether consumer behaviour changed due to COVID recession fears, or whether it's actually fast changing technologies. Alex, what's your thoughts?
I'm going to try and speak quickly. I think an important thing to remember is that people don't change very much. And it is over the amount that people shift their mindset, their behavior, and that over time is often overstated. I think it would be quite interesting to look at most people's way of life now compared with a year ago, or in the height of the pandemic 2 years ago. Probably isn't that different. Yes, we were undoubtedly doing some behaviors that were different because we couldn't travel in certain ways that we were used to. because we weren't able to go to the shops in the way. But you look at the UK now, it feels to me pretty much identical to 3 years ago. Okay, we've probably got more or digital subscriptions happen because people have realized that they were forced to make a change because they couldn't get their groceries, and now realize that that's quite convenient. Some of that will stick, but for the most part, we're quite hard to shift. Yeah. And so I would say it's optimistic to think that things greatly change consumer behavior, and certainly when it's a short period of time. So we go back to the fundamentals, which is, as I've said probably 3 times now, what do people need? What will they find valuable, and innovate and act upon that?
Great, thank you. So my final question is a bit of, let's get our crystal balls out, and what are our predictions for 2023? What are the key trends we're going to see? We've talked a little bit about influencer marketing, people buy from people. We've talked a little bit about sustainability still being at the forefront and experimenting, but it'd be great to hear what everyone's predictions are. Jessica, can I start with you?
Sure. I think there's a few things this sort of trend in frugality. So spending less frequently, but spending slightly higher value on things that will last. So this slight nostalgic nod to the past of Granny said, buy once, buy well. So we the reuse, recycle, pre-loved kind of attitude to things that we have, rather than disposable, which is where, things have, so there's quite a lot happening in that space. The age of community, I think, is the biggest thing. So we feel more disconnected and digitally lonely than we ever have, even though we're more connected. We're actually, the age of loneliness is kind of quite a huge thing that's happening. So people, brands, partnerships, getting together, connecting, feeling that closeness. So there's quite a lot going on in that space. And there's a kind of also a trend for instant gratification. So that comes back to your sort of quick commerce, I want a meal, I want it delivered within 10 minutes. I'm on social media, I want one click and I've got that product delivered to my door tomorrow. So I think a lot of these things, we're slightly changing, but we were changing anyway. So those are the kind of sort of macro trends that I'm seeing.
Thank you. Victoria.
I think I'm going to be slightly repetitive and a little bit more tech focused, but the ones I scribbled down as we went along were that, recession and uncertainty doesn't have to stop innovation. I don't think it will stop innovation in the tech industry for the reason that I've said. And the other point I was going to make relates to sustainability, and it's a hope that the bigger technology companies will continue to innovate, to unlock more ways for people to reduce their impact on the environment. And obviously CES took place kind of fairly recently, and things like Samsung partnering with Patagonia to develop a washing machine that reduces microplastics, for example, or other companies kind of leaning in and saying, bring back your kind of technologies, your kind of hardware, and we'll recycle it. But that's a hope. There was some kind of seeds at CES, but innovation, I hope it'll be a big year for innovation, despite the recession or pending recession or potential recession.
Yes, absolutely. Don't mention the word. Alex.
I found this incredibly difficult, which is perhaps not, professionally very good, given that we're in the business I'm in. I think a couple of those things have been mentioned already. There's definitely around this idea, resell, reuse, repurpose, lots of that. There was a quote from one of my colleagues, Pippa Bailey, who leads our sustainability division. And she said, one of the things around sustainability in particular, a consumer's unsustainable behaviors are a brand's unsustainable scope 3 emissions. And I think, which is pretty dead. So I think we're going to see, hopefully, brands and products working with what they're putting out and how they communicate to be more sustainable themselves, but to help consumers act more sustainably without pushing them and making them feel guilty about doing it. And, you know, as many consumers would say, without making them pay more for it. So I think that sense of extended responsibility on behalf of companies is going to help them to innovate. So maybe the innovation comes from, in some of the areas that Victoria says about how companies act and the interact. And Emma, you talked about the zero things, getting their act in gear, which might not necessarily be consumer facing, but that innovation can help their businesses survive and hopefully thrive. Good.
Emma, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, and again, it's I'm afraid it's probably just building a little bit on some of the other points. I think we're all boringly in agreement there, but I think just on the opportunity point, I think there's one thing there, like, yes, I think we're all fairly optimistic about the next year, and it feels like there's lots of innovation and creativity. I think if you're not sure, or if you're kind of curious about how some of this might play out, it's worth looking back at other such difficult times as, you know, 2008 recession. You can see some really interesting, amazing companies have come out of previous difficult times. You know, Airbnb is obviously sort of famously one of those. So I think worth looking back at what history has to teach us on some of this stuff. And then just to comment on Alex's point around sustainability, I think there's a really interesting trend in recruitment, actually, and we're seeing more and more potential hires asking us about our sustainability credentials. And it's something that, you know, came up, you know, maybe 1 in 5 people interviewing with you, you know, a couple of years ago. It now feels like it's really a sort of standard part of the interview process for us as companies. So I think thinking about that as part of your employer brand is definitely something to keep doing. And then I can bring in that AI question that I just saw on the Q&A.
Yes, thank you.
So just asking about how disruptive AI might be over the next year as a sort of general theme. I think I would say that, yes, of course, it's going to be disruptive. I think it's not going to be as fast or as flashy as maybe some of the media have led us to believe. I think there's, you know, it's obviously got amazing applications, but it's going to be some of the behind the scenes stuff that is, you know, it's much less interesting to read about, but really critical. So things like, you know, some of the stuff you don't see in health tech, or, you know, some of the less snazzy bits of driving, you know, it's sort of driving assistance rather than you having a sleep while your car drives you to Manchester or whatever. So I think lots to look at there, some really interesting stuff, but it's probably a little bit less mainstream than we might think for now.
Great, thank you. Yes, there are some interesting AIs that are coming out and around content and producing images and all sorts of stuff that we've been trialing. But I think you're right, it takes time. As Alex said, we don't change that quickly. Well, thank you so much indeed. I've made lots of notes and lots of great thoughts and insights from everyone. So Jessica, Victoria, Alex and Emma, thank you so much indeed for sharing those thoughts with us today. We will be writing this up and sharing the content, and also sharing the video of this if anyone wants to share that. So thank you for joining us as well, and look forward to seeing you all again.
Thank you. Bye-bye now, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.